Subscribe now. EU Debates.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In Senegal, in December last, I met doctors and researchers, very passionate and determined to save lives. And thanks to international cooperation, they created within the Pasteur Institute a center for vaccine production equipped with the most promising technologies. And several months later, in Borodianka, in Ukraine, I met with children and I saw in their eyes the horror of a war. And I've heard stories about violence against women, about rape, about torture, mass graves, the merchants of death. So I saw hope in Dakar and horror in Borodianka. Putting an end to horror and choosing hope is the promise of the United Nations, and that is also what founded the European Union. And that's what we want. We want hope for the entire world. And for this, the European Union extended their hand to all of those who want to work together for the common good and to honor the promise of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I am going to be talking to you about hope. But first, it is unfortunate, I'm going to have to talk to you about war. Any war is a denial of humanity, and all suffering are worthy of the same involvement, be it in Yemen, in Ethiopia, in the Sahel, in Myanmar, or in Ukraine. The Kremlin launched a war against the Ukrainian people, and hundreds of millions of women and children are thus targeted throughout the world. They are threatened with famine, they are left without heat, and they are crushed by the energy prices. The Kremlin is leading a hybrid war. This war combines armed violence with poisonous lies. The poisonous lies. The security of Russia is supposedly, for years, has been threatened, and I say this in inverted commas, by the West. That's false. The Kremlin is trying, and in vain, I hope, to mobilize the entire world against an imaginary enemy. Absolutely no one has threatened, attacked, or invaded Russia, and no one, absolutely no one in Europe wanted a conflict with Russia. What interest would we have in imperiling the security and prosperity of everyone? The second lie is that this war is supposed to prevent an alleged genocide of the Russian-speaking peoples in Ukraine and to denazify the country. It's false and it's repugnant. A genocide is a specific, intentional, total or partial elimination of a national, ethnic or religious group, and therefore no one, except for the Kremlin, would have remarked a large-scale massacre committed nowadays by the Ukrainians against other Ukrainians. And what is a so-called liberation, but it results in the killings of the Russian-speaking people and the destruction of their infrastructure of their cities? And lastly, the third lie is that the aggression against Ukraine is just a simple special operation and not a war. Once again, this is false and outrageous. It's a war. And the mobilization announced a few days ago of hundreds of thousands of reservists only confirms that. Banning the very name of war in Russia and imposing up to 15 years prison sentence for that does not change the nature of the event. It only shows its shameful character. It is a war. It's an unprovoked aggression, illegal and justified, which is trying to change internationally recognized orders by the use of force. It is not acceptable, and it's because we need to stop the Kremlin war machine that massive economic sanctions became unavoidable. And let me now move on to the fourth lie, according to which the sanctions triggered shortages of foodstuffs and fertilizers. That is false. It was Russia, even before the war, which decided unilaterally to drastically reduce the level of its grain and fertilizer exports, thus promoting the volatility of world markets. And it is Russia which decided to impose a military blockade on the Black Sea ports, thus making it impossible to conduct maritime trade. And it was the European Union which opened the corridors of solidarity by road, through which tens of millions of tons of foodstuffs have already left Ukraine, and it's an agreement broken by the Secretary General Guterres, which opened a naval corridor in the Black Sea, contributing to a price drop in the world markets and reopening the resupplies to Africa, Middle East, and Asia. And today, the pinnacle of cynicism, it is the Kremlin which threatens once again to not extend this agreement signed with the United Nations. And once again, it is the most vulnerable countries who will be the main victims of that. In fact, there's a very simple solution to end this food crisis which is threatening us. Russia needs to stop the war, withdraw from Ukrainian territory, and lift its blockade of ports. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, this web of lies clashes with a moment of truth and sincerity. A year ago, in a written statement which was published, Vladimir Putin affirmed, on the basis of historical fantasies, that Ukraine, according to him, is not a nation and is not a legitimate state. So this is what is at the heart of this thinking, but no one is fooled by that, and the sham referenda will change nothing here. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, in 1963, at the time of the founding of the Organization African Unity in Addis Ababa, Modibo Keita, the first president of independent Mali, said the following, and I quote, "Imperialism is a manifestation of domination by a man over another, of a society over another, of a people over another, and of the will to at any cost impose their way of thinking, their way of life, and their way of political and economic development." End of quote. Imperialism and revanchism. These are the foundations of this war of colonization, which is targeting Ukraine and which is deliberately flouting international law and the United Nations Charter. And it goes as far as threatening the use of nuclear weapons and of using, at this time, the largest European nuclear power plant as a military base. This must stop. This is not acceptable, and we support the efforts made by the IAEA Director Rafael Grossi to restore security at the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Ladies and gentlemen, I am telling you in the most solemn way from this rostrum that the European Union is asking no one to choose between East and West, between North and South. But there is a choice that needs to be made. And the choice of the European Union is to choose for the respect of borders and not aggression, for cooperation and not threats. It's to choose a rules-based order and not the law of the strongest. At this very rostrum, in 1948, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, the Belgian Prime Minister at the time, Paul-Henri Spaak, spoke directly to the Soviet Union. And he said, and I quote, "We are afraid because in this assembly you have made yourself the champion of the doctrine of absolute national sovereignty, and we wonder how an international organization can reach its goals if this outdated and reactionary doctrine is triumphant." Ladies and gentlemen, today Russia makes you afraid. The Kremlin brought war to Europe and is acting like a blackmailer. We cannot allow the destructive actions of one of us to imperil our common, fierce determination to act for the common good. The European Union is extending its hand, which is sincere and loyal, We have many challenges to tackle together. The pandemic, very painful effects, especially for the vulnerable. The Human Development Index is backsliding. The rights of women and minorities are flouted, and extreme natural phenomena are multiplying in number. Recently, we saw this in Pakistan and Nigeria. And fractures are opening up between developed and developing countries, between democracies and authoritarian regimes. Fractures are opening up also within our own countries. Multilateral cooperation is collective intelligence in action. It is also the DNA of the European Union, and the European Union is acting as a force for peace, development, and the promotion of human rights. The European leadership aims to build using solutions with you. It's not our role to lecture. There is no teacher, no one is a student. And it is within this spirit of cooperation that we're working at the UN, G7, G20, and everywhere. And it is for this reason, and it is this spirit that we're extending our hand with strategic partnerships. With our African brothers, we have completely changed the program. Our partnership is truly between equals and forward-looking, and I would like to reiterate here my support and advocacy for the inclusion of the African Union in G20. With Japan and South Korea, for example, we share so much, and day after day we're strengthening our relations. With India and the ASEAN, we're widening our areas of cooperation. Our links with the Latin American continent are natural, and we expect and are looking forward to a lot for the upcoming summit to give new impetus to our relationship. With the countries of the Gulf, we identify our common priorities, and we have frank and regular dialogues on our differences. Ladies and gentlemen, we want the emerging powers, including China, to participate sincerely in the collective efforts for peace and development. We advocate maritime security. We advocate stability in the Strait of Taiwan. We recognize the principle of one China, but we will not close our eyes to the violations of human rights, especially in Xinjiang and in Hong Kong. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here at the United Nations, the home for peoples of the world, and we do know, every one of us, that a robust multilateral system implies mutual trust. But the current system is not sufficiently inclusive or representative. The use of the right to veto should be an exception, but it has become, we have seen it, the rule. A reform is needed and urgent. And let me share with you this conviction. When a permanent member of the Security Council launches an unprovoked and justifiable war, the war which is condemned by the National Assembly, that member's suspension from this Security Council, in my view, should be automatic. Ladies and gentlemen, we support the proposals by the Secretary General on the Common Agenda. And the Summit of the Future in 2024 should be a historic opportunity to bring in these radical improvements. The European Union is very actively involved together with the G5 Sahel countries. We are ready to develop links with the Gulf of Guinea countries. We also work with Mozambique. We support the efforts made by Rwanda and SADC. And with our High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security, Joseph Borrell, we spare no effort to try and bring back the JCPOA on the Iran nuclear issue. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the Afghan people, especially the Afghan women, and we will not stop to combat everywhere the obscurantism which flouts on a daily basis the rights of women and girls in all areas. And at the time where I'm standing here in front of you, my thoughts go to the women and girls in Iran who are courageously rising to defend their dignity at the price of their lives. In Yemen, we are witnessing a serious humanitarian crisis, and the people of Yemen have the right to peace. We support the efforts made by the Special Envoy Grunberg to convert the current truce into a lasting ceasefire. The peace agreements between Arab states with Israel is progress in the region, but the Palestinian people has been waiting for far too long and in vain for any progress towards its own future. The Palestinian people cannot become the forgotten entity in the global landscape. This two-state solution of Israel and Palestine peacefully living together with a security assured for everyone remains a priority. And I have an opportunity to personally become engaged in a difficult negotiation with the President of Azerbaijan and Prime Minister of Armenia. Violence must stop, and the objective must be to resolve the conflict to bring in lasting peace and prosperity in Southern Caucasus. Leadership is to show the way, of course, but also leadership means delivering results. When it comes to energy security, we have been far too dependent for far too long, imperiling our security, our prosperity, our sovereignty. Energy and climate change are the two sides of the same coin. Overcoming the energy crisis means pushing back the climate danger. Protecting our biodiversity and our oceans is to safeguard our future. Climate neutrality is our lodestar in Europe. At the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we will strongly advocate to implement the promises of Paris and to go beyond. We want a fair and equitable transition. No country on their own can safeguard the planet. The European Union honors its commitment towards developing countries, and we expect that other developed countries will follow suit. Ladies and gentlemen, about 1/5 of humankind is now in danger of plunging into poverty and famine. 1/5. And the Russian war against Ukraine compounds this crisis. Initiatives are underway, and that's a very good thing, by the G7, European Union, and others. The European Union is mobilizing about 8 billion euros for food security by 2024. But we all know that more needs to be done. There needs to be more coordination, more money, and also more sovereignty. New agricultural models, more resilient, more equitable, are needed. More food sovereignty in Africa and Latin America is indispensable. And there also we are ready to extend the hand to support the projects of fertilizer production on these continents, similarly to what was done for the COVID vaccine. COVID-19 opened our eyes to our strengths and our weaknesses. Vaccines were made in record time, and under the leadership of the WTO Director Odzi, a balance was found between intellectual property, scientific innovation, and universal access to technology. But we do know that we need to draw lessons from the pandemic, which hit us so much. And that is the reason why Dr. Tedros and myself, some time ago, launched an idea of a treaty on pandemics to strengthen global health security. Its negotiation is on the way, and we need to finalize it. Ladies and gentlemen, I am concluding. We understand very well we are at a watershed moment of our history, a watershed moment of the history of humankind. Watershed moment expression was used and reused but sometimes we feel that we're living through something that is exceptional, extraordinary. And I'm thinking of Winston Churchill, who in 1946, when he was talking about the failure about the League of Nations to prevent the First World War, he said, the League of Nations did not fail because of its principles or conceptions. It failed because these principles were deserted by those states who had brought it into being, because the governments of these days were afraid of facing facts, and to act while there was still time. Act while there was still time. As the European Union, the United Nations, is a project of hope. founded in the wake of the horrors of 2 world wars. A few days ago, my 6-year-old daughter all of a sudden told me and her mother that she was afraid of war. And it made my hair stand on end, because no parent in the world can stand it when the child says they're afraid of war, or that they're facing war, or that they are hungry, or that their children cannot be provided with care. No parent in the world can stand a situation where their child does not have a hope for a dignified and happy life. Preventing or stopping horrors in Borodianka, in Yemen, or elsewhere, giving hope, as was the case with the doctors I saw in Dakar and elsewhere. That is the very nexus of our responsibility as leaders representing people in the world. And above and beyond our many differences, but above and beyond them, we all have red blood coursing through our veins. We all have hearts beating in our chests, and we have the same dreams of education and freedom for our boys and girls. I believe in collective wisdom. I trust that science and knowledge will give the world hope again. We need an awakening, and this awakening is now, and it needs to be together. And you can count on the European Union for that. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the European Council of the European Union for the statement just made.